Welcome everyone to our very last March for Men session. This one applies to everyone, as has most of our sessions, but Beth is going to walk us through cultivating our individual psychological stability. And I'm all about psychological safety, both at home and in the workplace. So I know I'm going to learn a lot. So Beth, please.
Great.
I'll let you take it.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. So welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. It's brilliant to talk about this because it's something that me and my business partner in the UK has spent some time putting together. So I'd like to share it with you and would love your thoughts as we go through. So I'm just going to share my screen and get up my presentation here. Now I'm working differently today, so I might have a couple different technical, hopefully no technology issues here, but let's just see how we go. Oops, see, I'm already starting. Here we go. I have to click here, I think, to mark. There we go. So I love this slide. I thought we'd start here and just ask the question, do you ever feel like you're about to lose it? And that feeling of being overwhelmed or stressed or emotional, anxious or in conflict, it's definitely all of those feelings I think we felt through COVID, and we've also felt in the workplace. So I thought I'd start here and just have you think a little bit about how maybe you would have reacted in the past, say when you were stressed or dealing with kids, or in the workplace and anxious. Would you have screamed? Would you have gone off the rails? Or would you have made a decision maybe that is something that you regret? So keeping it together, staying focused. I know it's a difficult process, especially when our emotions are involved. But today I'm going to give you some information and some thoughts on how we can consciously keep ourselves steady so that we don't feel like we're walking on a tightrope. So I've got here an agenda for us for today, and I will go through what psychological stability is. I'll take you through a neuroscience perspective, a framework of what psychological stability is in the brain. I'll point out to you the choice point, and then we'll go through some psychological strategies to help you develop a thoughtful thinking process. And I just want to remind everyone that this is not something that you can do overnight. It takes some practice, it takes some work, and you may already be doing some of it as is. So let's go through it and have a look. So what is psychological stability? Psychological stability has been outlined in research by having three different components. And the first component is extreme situations. The ability of a person to perform professional activities in difficult or extreme situations as successfully as under normal conditions. So I've highlighted the word perform here because this statement emphasizes the behavior piece of psychological stability. And just to be clear, an extreme situation doesn't have to be war. It can be a really uncomfortable conversation in the workplace or with a loved one. It can be a natural disaster in an extreme situation, or like a school shooting or something in the US. Those are obvious extreme situations. But they could also be emotional extreme situations, something along the lines of like when we learned that our parents were getting divorced, or when you're in an emotional situation where you're really uncomfortable and taken by surprise. So the second component is the cognitive level, where the ability to maintain a psychological state of or evenness during a stressful, situation. So here it's that ability to maintain calm during that stressful situation. A third piece is the emotional stability piece. And here we'll talk a little bit about how this is a continuously working piece. But this is the component that indicates that we have to create a habit around this. And this, believe it or not, is also a physiological level, and we'll see why very shortly. So what is psychological stability? Psychological stability is the ability to maintain a psychological state of calm or evenness during a stressful or problematic situation. And at the end of it, someone may call it inner peace, may call it keeping an even head, maintaining calm, but actually it's about the ability to cope. And it's about the ability to cope and be true to yourself. So having that authentic piece of the process to cope. I think that's really important. So we'll kind of go into that a little bit more. So it's basically about keeping an even head, and we'll talk about that authenticity piece of it in just a couple minutes. So here, let's go straight into the model. My colleague and I in the UK, we sat down. So what we did is we researched psychological stability to try to better understand what actually happens in the brain, what's actually going on. So we put together what I think is an explanatory framework to help you understand the process and see exactly what sort of happens in your brain. Okay, just saw a little note pop up there. We're going to learn about the choice point, which is the point at which we pause, and many of us may have already practiced that. But it's also shows where you can make good decisions and respond thoughtfully. So let's go have a look through this here. We're going to start with the example of COVID. And I'm going to throw a couple other examples in here for you to make it a little bit more human. So we have a stimulus and something happens. And for example, COVID. Yeah, COVID happens. Another example might be your boss walking into the room. So something as simple as that. Another example would be a glass falling off of a counter, something that you're not, responsible for, but you hear. A third one might be a man walking into a bar. You're sitting at the bar and you see that his neck is filled with tattoos. What happens? Well, you see someone say not wearing a mask with regards to the COVID. So you hear the constant bad news about how terrible COVID is. And what you're doing here is you're sensing the event. You're taking in information from your eyes, your ears, your taste. Sometimes if you're drinking in the bar, the noises, it's all coming in sensually. So if we look at COVID-19 as the example, it's the basic immediate sense of the event. So this is not your perception, have to be clear about that, or what you think of the event. It's just all of that information that's going into your brain. So for example, if we take the example of the boss, if you see him saunter in and you hear his heavy footsteps with the glass of water falling off the counter, you see the broken glass or you hear the crack of the glass as it falls. And then again, when we talk about the man walking into the bar, maybe you notice there's an accent or that he's got a certain cologne on. So again, this is about the perception. Then what happens after that is we go into the filtering stage. And this filtering stage is when the information that you just picked up goes into the brain and gets filtered through your beliefs and through your memory. So for example, with COVID, in your memory, maybe you have this memory of, oh my gosh, well, my mom's had pneumonia. This is a lung thing, right? So now you believe that COVID kills. So these beliefs and the memory all filter in the information that you're taking. And it's actually a fantastic way of it's a fantastic way of your brain being very efficient. So again, if we look at the boss, maybe you believe that your boss is angry because you hear that his footsteps are too heavy. Or when the glass falls, oh my gosh, you remember when your parents or your mother screamed at you because you dropped a glass and shattered the glass. Or again, with the man walking into the bar, maybe the last time you saw someone like that, you thought, oh my God, that person was really dangerous. Or maybe you think, it's just a dude, he's cool. So either way, your beliefs and your memories all play a part. So if we look at what's next here, we've got that cognitive level. This is where the processing takes place. So now you've grabbed your perception, it's filtered through and it goes into the brain and your neural pathways are processing the sensory information. And now you make that distinction. COVID is a threat. Boss, uncomfortable situation coming. Glass on the floor, it's a disaster. And maybe a man walking into the bar is just a weird looking dude. So this is where also your brain becomes ridiculously efficient. And it's where you apply all of your cognitive biases, whether you realize it or not. And the processing itself is all taking place because really what it's trying to do is say, if this is a threat, like a bear coming at you, do I run or is this all okay? So that's what this step is happening. It's your beliefs and memory going into action. So here I mentioned the cognitive bias point. I love this slide. So I just wanted to bring this out to make the point that understanding that there are a whole heap of cognitive biases out there. There are 180 of them. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to understand 180 cognitive biases, but it's more so that understanding that there are certain biases out there that you may have a tendency of experiencing or thinking about. So a couple of my favorites here are the confirmation bias. So I look for information that confirms my point of view. And so being in the science arena, I have to constantly say, hang on, is this something that I'm trying to confirm for myself, or is there another viewpoint? Another one is the optimism or pessimism bias, right? When we estimate either too positively or too negatively. So again, that would be like almost looking at the man who walks into the bar. Are we straight away making a positive assessment, or are we making a negative assessment based on what we normally would do? So I just wanted to put that in there so you could have a look that all of these types of biases are actually a good thing. They make our brain very efficient to decide whether something is a threat or not. So here we go, back to our model here. We've now processed, we've had our cognitive biases all in there. We've decided that COVID is a threat and that the man who's not wearing the mask is irresponsible. So that's what we've made and assessed. So it comes down to what's the physiological level. And this physiological level is the emotion level. But the reason why we decided to put and call this the physiological level is because your emotional pathways that will trigger a physiological reaction before you even realize you're having the emotion. So for example, your emotion now is coming through and you see your boss and you go, oh my God, I feel so nervous. I'm feeling fear. My hands are sweaty. I'm not quite sure what to do. The glass of water falls on the floor and all of a sudden you are so angry if that's your thing. The man walks into the bar. Now maybe you feel a bit nervous and you just notice that you're shifty, or you move in your seat, or physiologically, your body is reacting. And you feel it, the shakiness, the fast heart rate. So that's what that next level is that feeling. And why we call it the physiological level is because this is an example of what happens in the brain with fear. And it's before we're even aware of it. So we receive this source of whatever it is, our anger, our frustration, our fear, disappointment, frustration. You can see there on the slide, there's a number of things. And what that does is it goes straight in and arouses the amygdala. Straight after the amygdala, it goes into the hypothalamus, which then signals the pituitary gland, and that releases all of those stress hormones. So cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So this is the stuff now that we physically feel, our heart beating faster, the sweat in our palms. And actually it's no more is it an emotional response as it is a physiological response, it's both. So this, all of this fear in the brain, all of these responses are actually, again, your brain keeping you safe and being efficient. So if we come back to our model here, what do? If you feel the fear, you've got it all in your hands, your animalistic instincts have already taken over. They're helping to keep you safe unconsciously, which is fine, but you're not being chased by a bear. So there's no need to react and get up and run for your life. Now, unless of course you're in an extreme situation where yes, death is imminent, then you must get up and run. But this process happens no matter what. So whether you're being chased by a bear or whether you get into an uncomfortable situation, this whole process is so quick in the brain that immediately you're still going to feel it. So what about our situations that aren't life-threatening? So here comes our reaction. Okay, yeah, I'm there. Here comes our reaction. If your emotion is so overwhelming that you react to a situation with the full force of your emotions, like the running away from a bear, and try to make a decision, that decision is going to come as a reaction, a reactionary decision, and not a thoughtful decision. And you haven't put some thought into exactly how to respond. You are actually processly reacting. So if we take COVID as an example, you can see that maybe your boss walks in and you actually silence yourself. And that's your quick reaction, just to say nothing. Maybe the glass fell over and your memory and your filtering has all come through. And now you go, actually, I'm just going to scream and shout my head off at my kids so that they don't do it again. Or for the man who walked in the bar, maybe you just look down, you don't catch his eye, and that's your quick reaction. And that's okay. A lot of the times we do all of this, you know, and it doesn't require thoughtful thinking. But in situations that do require a thoughtful response to it, this is what this is what can be helpful to know, that the automatic reaction happens just at that point. So what do? What we need to do here is figure out a better way to behave. So when you feel the fear and your animal instincts have already taken over, how do you stop the process, or how do you make peace and create that thoughtful response? This, my friends, is the choice point. So this is the point in that entire process where you have the ability to choose. So this is where I call psychological stability is really that choice point, when you know that you're aware of that. So it's right in between all of those automatic actions that your brain has taken and the moment just before you react. You make a decision by using your executive control to choose how to respond. And you choose to respond in a more thoughtful way rather than reacting instinctively to your base reactions. So before I move on, I thought it would probably be good to look exactly at what executive control and function is in your brain. And so if we look here, you can see there's a whole mess of, it's a beautiful, you know, beautiful picture of the brain, but there are a number of different areas in the brain and that have a function assigned to them, or share functions with each other. So executive function in this sense is just the thinking part of our brain. And it's where we process our social cognition, our inhibition, our attention, our decisions and our plans. And it's also where we use our perspective memory, and that's our past memory. So specifically in our example, we have the frontal lobe, and that is where we are responsible for planning and organizing. We have the temporal lobe, which is responsible for understanding and language. And then you have the parietal lobe, which is responsible for perception and making sense of the world. And then underneath all of these regions is the amygdala. Now I want to show you quickly, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dr. Daniel Siegel's work. I'm just going to stop here quickly and show you what this model, I'm sure you've probably heard of it, but this model he designed to help understand the brain in showing children. And what he does is he creates with his fist a little brain. And this is your brain stem here, and this is your brain. And the way he explains executive function is by saying all of this bit on top, your upper brain, is your executive function, and underneath here is your amygdala and all of your ancient parts, all of the stuff that we've already sort of talked about. So what he does is he always says, if you're reacting, you're flipping your lid because you're using your emotion to go forward. You're not actually thinking. So we've got to bring that lid down to be able to actually think to be thoughtful in our response. So that flipping of the lid, even though I love that term anyway, is actually properly explaining that you have all of these functions up top that need to come over and calm down our amygdala so that we can respond thoughtfully. So let me go back to my presentation here and we can show you, whoops, wrong one, not that one, it's the beginning one, this one. Here we go. So if you think of, when we look at the little brain there, you can kind of see that all of these executive functions are on top and then the amygdala sits below. So if we go back to our, framework here, I want to point out this slide is really important because you can't have psychological stability without emotional stability. And you can see down at the bottom, we've got the bar of where emotional stability sits, and it sits after the perception under our cognitive level and under in getting into the physiological level. So by using our executive function, this is when we can consciously think about how to respond. But emotional stability has a huge role, and this is the part that requires the practice. again, it's, you know, we're wired to run from bears, but emotional regulation strategies here are sort of a partner in crime to the choice point, and they underpin much of this psychological stability that I've been sort of walking through. So some examples, I guess, of emotional stability strategies would be CBT or meditation, deep breathing, sleep, and not being hangry. All of these strategies can help to be less emotionally reactive in the first place. But then again, for some, it takes time to develop. And I know for some of you that are coaches, this is really where you sit and you help a lot of your clients. So here we are, along with those emotional regulation strategies, I've got some psychological strategies to help to build this thinking process. And I've outlined them here. So the first one is building that emotional understanding or that emotional intelligence. And there's a whole heaps of things that, you know, everyone is much more well equipped to discuss than I am. So I just bring it up with a couple points. There's also the mind-mentor mindset. And that's sort of the way I've taken our choice point and really added a coaching bit into it. And I'll show you that. And then the third one are PPIs, which are positive psychology interventions, and specifically the PPI of character strengths. So first, number one, let's build up our emotional understanding. And you can go find a whole mess of more strategies here. But what I've decided to do is put down, I just grabbed a couple that I use quite a bit. And you can see here that even though something may feel bad, that it doesn't mean it's dangerous. And that's something that takes practice to be learned. Even though something may feel bad, it doesn't mean that you're wrong to feel that way. So one key thing is to get specific with labeling your emotions. So when you're sad, figure out which specific sad. Just feeling low, really hurt, disappointed, unheard. And then when you're quiet or not confronted with a situation, to identify, what are you feeling? Am I comfort right now? Am I joyful? Am I actually happy? Am I at peace? Or am I actually a little bit shaken? Is something still running through my head? And at the root of any behavior lies an emotion. And this is something I use with my kids all the time. And I have to remind myself constantly that I have to look at this emotion as a learning opportunity, especially when, say, my kids are in a big, you know, a mess, or they've had a breakdown. Actually, that reaction, that breakdown, there's an emotion behind it, and that there's a root, the root of that reaction, that behavior there is an emotion. And that's something that, hence on our framework, there is the bottom piece that goes hand in hand with the framework. So emotions, all of them, they're short-lived. And I think that's another thing that we always seem to forget, that they fluctuate moment to moment. So some last longer than others. And so the key here is to become a scientist of your own emotions and ask yourself questions, and to sit down and really have a look at them and say, right, well, if this is happening right now, I know it's short-lived. What's the phrase they'd always say when you had a baby? You know, this too shall pass. And emotions are very much the same as that person. They will pass. They will pass. So the next one, the next strategy here is to develop what I called a mind-mentor mindset. And this is the ability to tune into your inner voice or your inner monologue and train it to help you in challenging situations. And I kind of like to think of this as building your own coach in your own head. So we all have experiences, and depending on your age, you have 1 or you have 100 million experiences, depending on how many years you've been on this earth. So you've learned a lot, and you have a lot to draw from, and you've felt a lot. So using your inner voice as a coach or a mind mentor can be, as a trusted advisor, can really help guide you in life, but it has to be equipped with the right information. So that process starts with what I called thinking with care. And this is really where, well, let's go through it quickly here. So thinking with care, and my beautiful acronym here of CARE, right? Calm. Make sure that you are calm before you engage. So your mind has to be, and this is the flipping of the lid. You got to calm down first. And then I've got the 3 A's: to be aware, acquire as much knowledge as you can, and then ask what's happening right now. And then you can respond thoughtfully using values, your strengths, and empathy, and then evaluate. How did that go? What should I do next time? So for the psychological stability piece, it's very much in A. That's what we're going to look at. And that's exactly what I have here for you. If we go back again to our model, we can see that the care method works right here when everything is so automatic at that choice point. So when we feel the emotion, what do? We calm down. And how do we do that? I have a great little technique that I know many of you have heard before, but it is called my tic-tac method. And my tic-tac method is, again, that's my choice, at the choice point where I say, wait a minute, I don't want to react here. So I literally physically get up and go get a tic-tac. I sit down, I observe, I notice the tic-tac in my mouth, I inhale the smell, I feel it, I taste it, and that by the time the tic-tac is gone, I'm calmed down. Now, again, you might have that pause moment at that choice point, right? You might have a breathing technique, counting to 10, or maybe you have the out technique. Whatever it is, just do it at that choice point, because that's the point that's going to get you calm. The next one is becoming aware. And you can consciously become aware of what's going on around you by asking simply, what's happening right now? So for example, that's why I love this slide here. It's like being in the eye of the storm. So this image actually was taken in the eye of Hurricane Dorian. So it was one of the most powerful Atlantic storms in history. It was on September 2nd in 2019, and the winds peaked at 185 miles per hour. So the storm was the worst natural disaster that the Bahamas had ever faced in history. But look at the eye. I think that's the best bit. It's calm, it's sunny, it's beautiful, but the storm of massive devastation is happening all around you. So the first step in equipping your mind mentor is really learning how to just stop and become aware of what's happening around you. So be the eye of the storm. Next, we acquire. If we go back to our model, we can see that this is when we take in all of our sensory information. It's way back at the beginning where everything was so automatic in our brain, we had that perception. So why can't we just stop at that choice moment and say, actually, what am I perceiving? Thinking this time, as opposed to just taking it in as a reactionary measure the way that the brain does. So what actually are we noticing? Then the last A is ask. And this is where we put our inner voice to work. We ask ourselves, what's happening right now? Which bias is present? How am I feeling? What emotion is with me? And more importantly, what is the other person thinking, feeling, or experiencing right now? And that is building your empathy and acceptance of the situation. I think of the glass falling on the floor, and my kid probably, they didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. So there's no need for me to go ahead and react as if it's a big disaster. Actually, I'm building empathy. My poor child has just realized that they've broken a glass, and that's okay. So at this point is really where you're asking those questions and getting to that empathy behind a conversation or behind a situation. So with all of your information, how do we respond? You've become aware that your emotions have taken control. We've stepped back, we've become mindful in acquiring all that information, and we've double checked with our personal beliefs and our values. And that's another piece. And especially for those of you coaches that are out there who do a lot of value work or talking about beliefs, it's almost as if I use that as the basis of my chat with myself. It's the basis of my inner voice discussion that I have with myself. And that, along with the information that I've acquired, you can see I've got my little mind mentor there. That is where I have that conversation to respond. And then I can respond with acceptance, with empathy, or with one of my strengths, which is what I want to get to next. So if we go back to our model, you can see that you've taken control of the cognitive level and at the choice point made that decision on how to respond thoughtfully. So again, I want to just calm, going through the care method, calm, the 3 A's, respond and evaluate. The reason why I put this here is because you have to do it again and again and again, and not with just an extreme situation, say when a psychological stability situation comes around, when you need that stability. You've got to do it over every situation, even when you're interacting with someone else and you think this is all grand. Take a moment to have a thought and build that, that empathy for what's actually happening. So the second, here we go. Another strategy, sorry, the number 3 strategy here is to use the PPIs. Now, positive psychology interventions, the reason why I bring them up here is because they are scientifically backed. So you've got, I've got 4 of them there. And believe it or not, the gratitude letter is one that is backed by the most research and is considered the gold standard. So that's just writing a letter of gratitude, whether you do it every night, you do it once a week, you do it once a month, you do it once in your, once a year. It's meant to have some pretty amazing effects. And what that does is, again, that brings up that this is part of the E, this is of the care model. So it's the evaluate, and it's giving you a moment to say, well, how might I have done that better? What am I grateful for that I did right? 3 blessings is another journaling activity you can do. You can have loving kindness and meditation. Have a meditation, say, right, well, in that instance, let's evaluate. What did I do right? How can I, find that love and acceptance for maybe something I didn't do right, and know that I can do better next time, or I want to do better next time. So all of these positive psychology interventions are, I think, a very important part of the evaluate piece of the care thought process. Character strengths are different, and that's the reason why I want to bring it up. Character strengths, and you may have another technique here, but I use character strengths as like one of my grounding pieces. So what are character strengths? Well, they're individual traits that can offer our mind mentor some information to use on how to respond. So now this is getting more into the behavioral side of things, of how you're thinking about how you might want to respond. So for example, I'll use me as an example here. My top character strengths are zest, love of learning, curiosity, honesty, and leadership. So in the example of the guy walking into the bar with his tattoos all over his neck, I'm going to pause, get to that choice point, and ask myself, which character strength can I use right now? And immediately I come up with, well, actually, I'm curious. Why does he have all those tats? What stories are behind it? He must have lived an amazing life here, or a really troubled life. I don't know, but I'm quite curious to find out. So this is one of my go-to strategies. Now, maybe especially when I'm having a conversation with somebody new, I use honesty quite a bit. Do I want to answer honestly with this? Yes, I do. Or using the glass example, if I'm going to react, I notice my child's really, really uptight and upset. What character strength do I want to use here? Well, maybe I'll just use my zest, which is the let's go. It's quite all right. We can do this. So knowing these character strengths, or knowing your individual traits, can really help you in the moment at that choice point to say, actually, I'm going to use this. It's almost like giving yourself that technique, giving your mind mentor to say, this one, pick that one needs to work right now. So this is one of my go-to strategies. I use it nearly in every situation I can. And I've now gotten myself into the habit. So that's the whole point of the emotional piece here about building psychological stability, is to have a habit of thinking thoughtfully to be able to get there. So coming back to our framework here, we can see now how in that choice point of psychological stability, that emotional level underneath aids and helps you as an individual to have that conversation in your head, to make a decision on how I want to respond, or how you choose and how you want to respond. And then guess what? It may be right or wrong, doesn't matter. The point is you've actually made a choice, giving you, it's empowering. It gives you that power to be able to say, okay, well, I made that choice. And then when you go through your care model, you go back and evaluate and say, okay, so that wasn't the right choice. Or do you know what? I'm really glad I waited before I said anything, because I was able to stop and actually take stock of, my child's tantrum, or the boss was coming in and actually just has new shoes on, and he's actually just come and giving me a raise, whatever it is. Same here with COVID. You can choose it how you're going to respond to the man without the mask. So that's all I've got for you today. I hope it was coherent enough and that you are all understand it, but I'm happy to answer any questions on anything part of the program, the framework, or anything.
Thank you, Beth. I love that. Can I use that care model with my clients?
Go for it. I would love it. I would love it.
Yeah. Yes, I love the emphasis also on the 3 A's and then the evaluation at the end.
I find that I even have that evaluation. So I'm a big journaler and always have been. So at night, I always sit down and be like, oh, I have nothing to write. And then I think, well, hang on a second. What did I do today that I want to change? Or what went well today? And again, that's kind of the positive psychology. It's mixing it, right? I mean, you make them your own. Your clients and your friends will have their own ways of doing things, but at least giving them that option to say, actually, I'm going to evaluate whether or not I was right in that situation, or not even right, but if I could respond better.
So does anyone have any questions?
Maybe just a quick question, Beth. I mean, sometimes, like, we're all individuals, we're all different, and I was just wondering, as you're speaking there, there's the fast path, I guess, of our initial perceptions and the automatic responses that happens, and then there's the slow path around into what our brain makes of those perceptions and making sense of it. Is there any evidence around the speed and the physical speed, I guess, of that initial response, and how quickly we can actually respond, and how, taking that into account, and how you can actually help one person who has maybe a more rapid response to someone maybe who has more time built in physiologically to respond from that initial point of that fast initial response to having time to think through what the response is going to be. Is there any evidence around that? Do you know of anyone who's doing some research, Siegel, or any of these guys, around any effects, or is that a factor, I suppose, in helping and understanding maybe how one person will respond versus another?
I agree with you. I think it's actually a factor. I mean, I know for that automatic response, some people will have that sweaty palm thing, right? It doesn't even matter what they're doing. They've got sweaty palms. They go, Jesus, what's happening here? I got sweaty palms. Other people have a quick temper, and that's, it's a learned thing. So that can be taught. So, but I think the physiological piece, when we were doing the research, because again, I was trying to find out how is it that how is it that we can react so quickly? You know what it was? It was the terrorist events in London. And why is it that some people, were running for the hills, and then other people were reacting differently? So is it because they have an emotional stability or psychological stability to say, I got this, I'm in? And I couldn't find anything for it, but instead I found out, the research there to figure out what actually happens. And so I don't have an answer. Sorry, Seamus.
No, it'd be interesting just to say, you just triggered a thought in my mind. It would be interesting to do some research on that, because it could be a factor as regards, why some people are more responsive or find it more difficult to control their emotions. And it might not just be a truly psychological thing. It could be actually a real physiology behind it. So I was just interested.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and it does require research, and I'm sure there's stuff out there, because you just reminded me that it brought us up to like the George Floyd, incident, and I sit there and I think, 7 minutes is an awful long time, to be in that situation, and so is that a reaction, or was that a response? And that's always where the questioning will always come into play. What was going on? Was there so much adrenaline being created that he couldn't stop? He couldn't get out of his thought process at the moment, which was do this, hold down. There was no evaluation happening whatsoever, and that choice point, or even that there was no pause that was taken. Or perhaps there's no place it hasn't been learned. I don't really know. That's
the secret, isn't it? It's actually in the heat of the moment, that choice point, having the ability to actually have enough sense, I guess, around you to be able to actually appreciate you have a choice, I guess, and that's the breakthrough. I think that's the big thing, right?
Yeah, when I was going through therapy, the biggest thing for me to learn was learning how to get to that choice point, because I didn't have it. And it was the tic-tac that did it. And, it was my therapist saying, I'm telling you to stop your behavior. Whatever's happening, like the earth isn't going to blow up, like just stop and just go pause and use that as your way of reconnecting your, flipping my lid back down. And whereas I thought the world honestly was going to end if my poor son wasn't being taken care of, and she gave me that permission. And I think that is kind of the key here, is finding that calmness, that choice point to say, you have permission to not react. And you have that permission to say, actually, I'm not comfortable here. Hang on, give me a minute and let me pause in my own time and then respond thoughtfully, as opposed to just coming at it with some reaction. And that, I would say that this whole process would go really well with listening for executives, to teach them to say, well, it's not about you speaking so much. Have you had to listen, take a pause, what's happening here? And get to a choice point on how you maybe want to take a meeting another direction. And even, it doesn't matter if you have an agenda, and using it in that format.
Noticing, basically. I mean, and use whatever works, I guess,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the secret. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you on actually very close, similar to that point where you spoke about executives or whatever, I've actually had a client and we've tried to identify how he's feeling about certain issues and whatever, and he finds it nigh on impossible to identify emotions, to say what emotion he would be experiencing or whatever. Have you any thoughts on that?
Just like I said in the presentation, emotional stability and emotional, stability, it goes hand in hand with psychological stability. And I think if that's the piece that's missing, then that's the piece that has to be worked on. I've got some great resources on like EQ or what is it, emotional intelligence and stuff.
Yeah.
That's a grounding foundation to this whole psychological stability process. I mean, you have got to have your understanding of your emotions and to know that they're telling you something, and to be that scientist, if you will, to say, actually, I'm feeling anxious right now. Why? And, just to be able to say anxious, well, wait, what kind of anxious? Nervous anxious, really scared anxious, or fearful anxious. To be able to understand that within yourself it's undercurrent, it underpins this whole psychological stability. So if you can't do that, I would say that you're going to get more reactions than you're going to get responses, having more difficulty thinking through how to respond versus reacting. Does that help?
Yes, it does. It gives me some thoughts. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Beth. I absolutely love that.
Oh, good.
I took loads and loads of notes. I have a question which might be silly or might be crazy. I'm not sure. What's the difference between psychological coach and psychological therapist? Because you mentioned your own therapist and coaching, and there's so much psychology that goes into everything that you were just describing. And I'm trying to work out why one would call it coach and one call it therapy.
I will show you. I'm going to pull it up right now. I have a great visual which helps. Let me get it here, because this is, and it's so difficult because I actually had a same discussion with someone recently, and I said, I'm actually not a coaching psychologist, because that's somebody who's different. That's someone who's clinically trained as a psychologist who works clinically in a room with somebody else. And I'm not that either. Let me see if I can grab it, because I've got, where is it here? Maybe it's in this folder here. Here it is. Here, let me pull this up and see if I can't share this.
So a coach would never call themselves a therapist.
Nope.
Oh. Can I just add something there as well? There's two words come to mind, and just where you're getting that, Beth. For me, it's around, one is around prevention, I suppose, Louise. That would be my perspective, at least. So it's around mental fitness and coaching, and then the therapist is more around recovery and someone who's actually suffering maybe from a clinical issue or whatever. It's really around maybe a post-event and recovery from a mental issue, where positive psychology or mental coaching is more around helping people to develop mental fitness, I guess. So that's how I would see it, at least.
I think that's spot on there. So a psychological coach is someone who focuses on the present and future, helping to overcome psychological blocks and barriers. So what that is right in between coaching itself. So someone who's a life coach or a behavioral coach, sits above it, along with mentoring and guidance, and then counseling and psychotherapy are below it. And a psychotherapist is someone who deals with, pathological distress. And same with counseling, we'll deal with distress and psychological disturbances. But really, a psychotherapist is someone who is going to look at what's causing, the thinking behind. So I had a psychotherapist help me through my postnatal depression. And so she would come in and give me different techniques to get out of the depression and get out of that thinking spiral. And then what I try to do is, when I work with my clients, is we're always looking forward. We're always looking ahead, and we're taking the coaching practice of goal setting in a certain extent, but we're looking at how do you, the goals of how you think, using language and all that kind of stuff. So that's the difference. And I think it's a legit question. It's so difficult because I don't want to ever be a therapist or a counselor, because you're trained differently. And same with a psychotherapist, it's clinical. It's hard work, I think, but some people are amazing at it. My therapist including, she was perfect for me. And then from the coaching perspective, you've got a whole different array going on there too. So.
Thank you. It makes a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, and I think it's different in every country, because even though I've got a master's in psychology and neuroscience, I'm not considered a psychologist. And I would be, I think, in the States, but I'm not in England, and I don't think I am here either. I think you need to be clinical to be a psychologist. So it's hard with the labels.
Because there is a lot of what you're doing and what you covered there, changing your mindset. So that's coming from past behaviors. So there is an element of the psychology in how you've developed behaviors, how you might be angry, how you might react in a certain ways based on past behaviors. So there is a lot of psychology in it, and you'd have to address some of that in order to be able to move forward, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The way I love to work is to say, right, well, then what's the mechanics going on in the head? So what's the neuroscience? And then what psychological techniques can we use and apply with it? So connecting the two, because the term neuroscience is very broadly used. And what neuroscience is actually the science of looking at what mechanically happens up here. And so it's not as if you can apply, there isn't a thing called applied neuroscience yet. That's another thing I'm working on with my colleague in the UK. To apply neuroscience, you have to have a psychological component, because that's what it is. It's to take the knowledge that neuroscience gives us and then apply it through psychological means is how that all works. So when someone says that they use neuroscience, I'm all for it, because it's a great buzzword, but it's at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're learning about the mechanics of the brain and what areas work for which, and how you can harness that information. So I like to think of myself, even though I'm a psychological coach and I coach with clients, that's one area, but actually the stuff I really love to do is this education. And it's that the applied neuroscience or the psychological education to help people apply it to their coaching strategy. So for all of you guys that are coaches out there, it's very much, let me help you, let me give you the information, then you go take it and go coach, because that's what you guys are good at.
Thank you.
Cool.
Can I ask one more question? So the psychological stability is really our own individual kind of responsibility. It's within our own selves. So is this kind of correct? So that psychological safety is the environment where you're able to have psychological stability?
You're in it, right. Yep. It's not only the environment, it can be with an organization. So an organization can foster psychological safety, meaning it's okay to be, to talk and so forth. But if you don't have your own psychological stability or your own psychological safety, I mean, you can use that same term. But if you don't personally have it, then it has to be trained to be able to come out in a team environment, because it doesn't matter how many people. You can have 20 people put together and you can say, well, we're a psychologically safe environment. Go for it. Tell me everything that you want to, that you're fearful of, everything that you think. And it's never going to happen, because people themselves as individuals either feel safe or they don't. And so it's allowing and figuring out how to have those individuals that may not have the same psychological safety or stability as somebody else to be able to come forward. So they're very much connected, and probably I would say interchanged, or the phrases are interused because it's so new. But the psychological stability from the research point of view, from an academics point of view, is very different than psychological safety, which is much more about the environment and including like going to a shopping mall. We have a client that we worked with in the UK who has autism, and this shopping mall is trying to find ways to diversify itself and to make itself, a better place for people with autism. And that is a psychologically safe thought process. How can I make this so that if someone is too overstimulated, they can go someplace where it's safe for them? Or can we make the environment a bit more safe? So thinking along those levels would be a psychological safety issue as well. But they're interconnected. And I think some people use them interchangeably as well. And I don't see why not, because I think it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about knowing how to think, thoughtfully before you respond, or at least to have the ability to say, actually, I'm too scared to speak up right now. I'm not going to, because even that awareness is huge.
Absolutely.
Beth, I have a question, and thank you so much for everything. I took loads of notes as well, and I really like just splitting it up. I think makes it really clear for people where they have the choice. So I think even when you talk about therapy, coaching, psychology, like it's up to people to kind of find the different tools. They're not going to find the solution to everything in their whole life in one person, I suppose. So it's just really clear to have it all lined out. But one of the things that you mentioned when you talked about journaling, because I love journaling too, and it's something that I would always suggest, as in gratitude, what worked well that day, or maybe even splitting it up like physical, emotional, spiritual, mental. But one thing that you said is that you would find things as well that you would want to improve or that you could do better. So one of the things I've been noticing is that some people have a tendency to be quite a perfectionist and never feel good enough. So what they end up doing is journaling about all this stuff that they want to improve, want to get better at, that they didn't do well in the day. So like I never really was aware of that before, and now I suddenly realize that sometimes it can be a bit detrimental as well, where it's actually used as a positive tool. So what advice would you give in that sense, when you see that kind of happening with someone?
Yeah, that's difficult. Actually, it's a hard one, because again, I come back to education, and I would go back and say, look, this is the process of journaling that was done, that the positive psychologists, have explained. This is how. And if you get off track, to kind of come back. So when I was doing my master's, my dissertation was all on positive psychology interventions in the workplace. And what I found interesting was, in my research, the gratitude piece of all of those interventions was the gold standard. And what I found in my research is that it's all subjective. So actually, how can they call it the gold standard when actually it's all subjective? Yeah, so it's not as if you can say to me, science has backed that, the gratifying journal is going to be the be all end all, and you're going to feel so much better. Actually, it's all subjective. So I would steer away from the idea of, I guess, I would steer away of just saying, go ahead and journal, because that can take somebody down a slippery slope, and making sure there are boundaries around how you deliver that exercise, and or give them that as an exercise, and just say, look, however you want to do it, and however you feel, is this, I know some people just won't do it, and just say, well, look, if you're doing it every night, here's what I want you to do. Answer this, and this question, and then give it to them and just leave it there and say, do nothing else, just answer those three. So putting boundaries, I think, just on the ask, and can help. As I'll tell you, my journals back in the day, before I had therapy, were, if anything, were doing me more harm than good. And it brought me straight down. It was victim mentality, and very much blame me, blame every people, and the anger, and it was all there. until, again, when I got into therapy. And you can see it now. I mean, everybody's sort of journaling. There's these great big journals out there for sale for 30 quid on whatever, on, you know, on Amazon that says, here, answer these 6 questions. Well, actually, some people need that. They need those boundaries.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's a good point, because you sometimes don't, because you might start out with those clear questions, but then over time it can kind of go off track, where you realize that actually, is that journaling, you know, is it helpful? Because it's really meant to make you feel better and focus on the positives. You know, it's not really meant to to drag you down into a hole after a while either.
Yeah, exactly.
I did a program called The Artist's Way a couple of times. I'm doing called The Listening Path now with Judy Cameron. And the morning pages, though, even though it's not always in the morning, I do find helpful in terms of, as somebody else said, I don't know what I think until I see what I've written down. And it's a great way of clarifying a little bit what's going on. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Don, because I was mentioning to Mindy the Reluctant Gurus. They're like 2 girls. They did this creative workshop, and they actually based that workshop at the time on that book, The Artist Way. And it's like it puts things in a very practical way. And I think it's that creative process as well, where you kind of take yourself out of your mind and you do things in a creative way. And then you go back to your mind and you see what comes up. I think it's a huge benefit sometimes to not try to do it in a rational way almost. Because even this morning I did a little visualization, and it was just like, it was basically about the meadow, so about a field, and it was like it was nothing to do with, you know, your intention for the day. But then at the end, people were like, oh, actually, because I did that, then I came away with all these realizations suddenly. So it does work. It's just kind of doing that work and then trusting that something will come out of it, even if it doesn't really make sense. You know, it doesn't always have to make sense.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way to declutter as well, Don. I think that's what it comes back to as well. It's around just getting all this business, maybe that's rumbling around in there, down on paper, it's captured, it's there, and even the very fact of writing it, it's almost like a stream of like a pipe coming out of your brain, and getting it out onto paper, it can be really, really effective, I think. So
yeah, and I think it feeds into your session, Beth, your presentation, because you know, it sort of anchors you, as you say, Seamus, and also you have to focus, although maybe you don't realize you're focused, but you're not reading a paper, you're not looking at your phone, you're not doing anything else to getting yourself 45 minutes or an hour or something to just do that in whatever place that is. And I'm very keen on that area and listening skills and all that. But that certainly is terribly, I mean, one of the things you realize, you cannot read a paper and listen to the radio at the same time.
Mhm.
It's that sort of thing of only one of these is going to work. Which am I going to choose? And so just on the journaling similarity to morning pages, I think there's a great similarity there, but it is different in terms of what you're trying to achieve, I think.
I think that's why it's so individual. I think it's sorry guys, it's back down to the individual and what works for the individual. I think that's it. So it's an iterative job. It's an iterative story of exploring possibilities and then just picking and working with the thing that works for you, you know.
Yeah,
because journal prompts sometimes work. Like I did a little workshop. It was like an Instagram live with Rupi. She has the famous like poetry book, and she just did a session where she asked random questions and she gave words, and it was just like write everything down that comes to your mind when you hear that word, and you're not really making sense of what you're writing, but then you come away with something new. Because when you're journaling every day, you might find that you write the same stuff down every day, and it's not really, giving you something new or opening your mind. So it's just about asking, what do you write down when you talk to your inner wisdom or something, and suddenly you have all these answers, and it's actually just yourself saying it.
There's great research, actually, and maybe I'll write that for my article this week. There's great research on how the brain shifts from actually writing versus typing versus being on a phone. And I mean, we all know the research there, the science is there, that it uses a different part of your brain, and that's the part of the brain where creativity also lies. So it's yeah, writing is a creative process, I think.
Definitely, definitely.
Cool.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thanks so
thanks so
much.
much, Beth.
Love this.
Great.
Thank you, Beth.
Right,
Bye.
all right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. Thanks.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for everyone. See you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.